Hey everyone, this is Shawn Sease over at Humantic AI with the Authentic Sales Leader podcast. And I have Nick Capozzi, my neighbor over here in Arizona, with me this morning. Nick, thanks for joining me.
What's up, Sean? Welcome to AZ. Thanks for ruining our housing economy, you and all those other Californians. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
Well, what can I say? It's probably not the worst thing. I came from far, far northern California, so I moved out of the Bay Area 27 years ago. So I'm not one of these sold my $2 million 1,200 square foot house and jacked up the prices in Arizona. That's not me. My father did that, so I'm riding his coattails.
No, I'm just kidding. It's actually not, it's nice to have a little bit of California vibe kind of slowly infiltrating into Arizona because we are a little bit West Coast, but we're a little bit Southwest. We're kind of on an island, so we'll take you. I'm happy to have you.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining me today. I asked Nick to join me because I had the pleasure of going out to dinner with him a couple months ago and meeting him um, in real life, and I was captivated by his storytelling ability. His enthusiasm's absolutely contagious, and he's just a joy to be around. And from what I could tell, represents all of the best parts of what we're trying to do when we put our best foot forward. We're our customers and next best customers, prospects, referrals, just trying to be part of what is great about sales these days and networking. So we know that I came from California. Everyone knows that. I'm a 51-year native of California, refugee in Arizona now. Nick, you told me a really great story, or you gave a background about going from the ocean to the desert. So for those of you who don't know you, which I doubt there's very many people, what does that story sound like really quick?
Well, there's one quick part. You want to talk about being a refugee? I'm a winter refugee from Montreal. I knew as a kid I couldn't do winter. I really knew that at 8 or 9 years old, and I wound up on cruise ships. I thought, yeah, I did one as a lark to skip a winter, one Canadian winter, and I got hooked. So I spent actually most of my career selling B2C high-end luxury goods, so Swiss watches, jewelry, to cruisers, duty free on vacation, and wound up in Arizona about 10 years ago. I had family here and just kind of traveling around. We had these, what was cool about cruise was I'd work every day for 6 months, but then I'd have like 2 months vacation. So I'd come home. I'm like, where do I want to go? And I had family here in AZ, and I just kind of got hooked on the sun being out every day. We have 300 days, no clouds in the sky here. So every day is bright and sunshiny. Everyone is high on vitamin D. No one honks their horn. So I traded in the ocean and living at sea for living in the desert, but it was a pretty good deal. I'd do it again.
Yeah. That the when you originally told me that story, the first thing, and I just did it again when you said it, is you were selling high ticket items to folks that were on the ships. And when you say duty free, I imagine that's tax free for cash off the books, that sort of thing. And so I think it's probably pretty fair to say that that whole experience was sales through and through, right? Like meeting people for the first time, building some rapport, making a connection, and ultimately closing a deal and helping people get what they want.
You know what? If I look back and I'm going to translate it into like kind of B2B tech, which is the
Yeah.
space I live in now, I was the entire go to market. I was demand gen. I had to get people excited about the idea of shopping for duty free. Because when you're on, you're in New York and it's cold in the winter and you're coming to cruise, you're thinking about the ship first, the location second. You're not thinking about the revenue departments. But if you are, you're thinking about the sexy ones, the
Yeah.
spa, the casino. You're not thinking about duty free shopping. So I had to get you excited about duty free shopping. I then was essentially an SDR trying to book you to come to these sessions we were having to explain the product. And then I was essentially an AE in, reading them and what are they trying to accomplish and, getting them kind of moving them along the line to getting them closed in these stores. And then I was sometimes customer success. I really kind of covered this whole go-to-market gamut. But I was a seller first. And I think what was interesting, I told people I went from cruise to COVID. I just happened to get out of cruise like weeks before COVID hit. It was a funny coincidence. And it was a struggle for everyone, but it was a real struggle for me because I would have 1,000 interactions a day with people on cruise ships. Sometimes
Yeah.
it was a 15-minute conversation. Sometimes it was a hat tip, good morning. but I would interact with people, and I got so good at reading body language and understanding their intention quickly because I just did it at volume, right? I was kind of scaling, just meeting and greeting people. And I think that, understanding personalities and how to sell to different personalities and different pain points and different objections. I mean, it was, I can't put a price or I can't put a price on just the amount of people that I came in contact with over basically 10 years living at sea and then 5 years as an executive shoreside.
Yeah. Would you say that your ability to quickly adapt to somebody's energy or personality type or mood or something was something that you kind of honed or forged by having so many at bats or being, outgoing enough to interact with people? Or do you contribute some of that to a natural ability? Have you always been like that? Because I know there are people like that, but where'd you say the spread is there on natural ability to read the room and just sheer at bats that gave you the ability to get excellent at that?
So the sheer at bats for sure defined me, but I didn't know how to take that, break it down, and teach it to someone else. And some of the things I can't because I have almost like 10,000 hours on a stage. So I was
Yeah.
reading the collective body language of 500 people who are from Detroit, Denver, Des Moines, Dallas. It was this homogenized American crowd. So I could watch the crowd's reaction to something I say. And if everybody moved in a positive way, I realized I was reaching America instead of just reaching, Florida. But how do you train that? And I couldn't because there was some natural ability for sure. However, I trained over 800 people, and what I realized was, so a lot of my sellers were not American. A lot of my sellers were from Colombia and Serbia and India. So how do I teach someone from Belgrade how to sell to Debbie from Des Moines, Iowa, right?
Yeah.
How do you do that? And, a lot of it was just about building connections. So I would say find something you're passionate about. Maybe it's food, maybe it's hiking. And then, there's only 50 states. So when someone's coming past you on a cruise ship and there's lots of opportunities for, again, these 1,000 interactions in a day that I would have, just be like, hey, where are you visiting from? Easy, safe question. And one thing is a Canadian I learned very quickly, after themselves and their family, what Americans, painting with a broad brush, love to talk about is where you're from. It's very tribal, right?
Yeah.
I'm from Texas versus I'm from Washington State. So I would teach my sellers who were not American, find something you're passionate about. Let's say it's food. And then, like, what's the one thing I got to, oh, you're from Mississippi? I've never been. I'd love to go. What's the one thing I got to try? I got to eat when I go to Mississippi. And you would see these people, again, these non-Americans talking to Americans and getting them to make these connections and build these bridges. And again, there's only 50 states. After 2-3 weeks of asking that question to kind of everyone as an opener, now you've got this database of, oh, you're from Vermont? I heard you guys have the best maple syrup, right? New Mexico, how does everyone not know about Hatch green chilies? Seems super simple, but it was very easy to build a database for non-Americans to kind of talk about these things. And then when you're in the middle of the ocean and you feel so foreign coming again from, Colorado, and then this young guy from India is like, well, wait a minute. I've heard I'm afraid of Rocky Mountain oysters. It's like, oh my gosh, I wasn't expecting that. And it opens you up. It brings down the barriers to a great conversation.
Yeah. It seems like frameworks kind of develop out of that on their own, don't they? Because I think what I heard you say there is that in order to train different people from around the world, these different, cultures, different language, things like this, that you were able to come up with a framework that really worked for everybody. And what's always interesting to me about that is that whenever I hear these stories, there never seems to be anything new under the sun. It's like an order of operations. You have to do this first, then that, then this, and you can't do this if you haven't done that. It doesn't work, and some people do that. Because I think what I heard you say was, hey, we need to get people to open up, so we probably need to establish some kind of trust. It seems like this is what was happening underneath there, right? Which, and a simple way to do that for all of you, ask them where they're from.
Yep.
because everybody likes to talk about where they're from and maybe start telling their story. And I think that that's kind of one of those order of operations things or frameworks that just cuts through everything. Where you're from. Now you've built, or you've kind of, what would you say, kind of reduce the fear, right? You've got some level of comfort, maybe a little bit of trust, and now you're having a conversation, and now we can be, that's what I call that fear to trust, the curiosity, and it just seems to kind of cut through everything, and which is a really a framework, because then you can apply the framework to anybody. The kind of the culture, the speech barriers and things like that seem to go out the window, because if we can go from point A to point B, if we can reach the objective, to me, that's always a lot more important in sales or relationships than kind of how you got there. If we can point, if we can take aim at a destination and you can get there with this framework, now we're winning. What are your thoughts on those frameworks, that kind of idea?
I'm with you 100%, but I think what's interesting is I love frameworks, but then I wanted my sellers to play jazz music, right? Not just classical music, very structured. I wanted them to be able to be free. And I think what was interesting when I first got into the B2B tech space by accident, what was interesting or intriguing to people was this B2C background I had in like rapport building. Because the first demo I sat in B2B, there was like 8 people from their side, 6 from ours, and we were waiting for one more person, and it was like 6 minutes of dead air, and everyone had cameras off, and this is awful. And I'm like, hey, listen, we need to bring some rapport building, and B2B, especially SaaS, is so process driven, is so framework driven. This is exactly what works, but the reality is, yes, it does work successfully, but there's other ways to be successful as a seller. And you might not fit into that traditional SaaS B2B framework, but there's other tactics and other ways. Like had I walked into B2B SaaS 10 or 15 years ago, I probably would have flamed out because it was so framework and process driven.
Yeah.
Whereas now I use those as checkpoints. But I think, again, there's opportunities that are missed, especially, I'm going to plug Humantic here for a second, especially with a tool like Humantic. Like I saw Humantic for the first time sitting on a couple of demos for some emailing tools. And I was like, stop, show me that again. Pull me up again. What? Wait a minute. Because if I had that, I'm not trying to plug Humantic, but it's a perfect opener to what I'm about to say in that, had I had that as these guests were now walking down the hallway towards me, how different my conversations would have been, how much more tactical I would have been. So big fan of frameworks, because I think you do need a North Star. I think you need structure, and there's a reason that we have so much process and structure. But I also think too, like, don't be afraid to play a little bit of jazz. I would try things. And one of the things, sorry, quick rabbit hole, but one of the things I would tell my sellers, they were on a ship off the coast of Japan. This is before like even I had WhatsApp. I mean, I've been doing this since like 2000, and I would wait for them to like send me VHS tapes from across the world. So it would take a week to get the video. So I'd make them watch their own tape and sit down and find issues. And basically what I was telling them is, don't trust me to train you. I am your VP. I am in charge of training you, but you need to be able to train yourself. You need to be able to self-coach. Let me give you tools around that. And we did it because we didn't have the time because of just the logistics of it. But then I got into B2B SaaS and people were coming with these problems. And I said, well, wait a minute. What did your boss say about that? What did your supervisor say? How did they train? And they're like, man, they don't have time to train me. They're busy with forecasting. They're busy with these meetings. So empower yourself via events like this, via communities, via YouTube, but take advantage of training yourself and what are different ways to maybe get to that same result. And I think, again, we're so process driven in SaaS that, play a little bit of jazz music.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm passionate about that, Shawn.
No, I mean, I agree with you. I agree with you because one of the, again, we're both going to rabbit hole here because we do this, but one of the things is that I think that there's so much talent out there. I mean, people are so great and so hungry and so good at what they do, and the inside of everybody is just, an exceptional person trying to get out. And I think frameworks, even You know, it's all the way down in the weeds. Sometimes even like lead scoring and all these other gates or things seem to cause people to have to stay inside of a inside of the rails, which, you know, from a culture perspective, or am I happy to be here perspective, always seems like almost creating unknowingly, nobody does this on purpose, but unknowingly creating the conditions to know who to blame when things don't go well, as opposed to creating an environment for people to succeed. You know, in again, those are always really simple things to say, and they're kind of hypey and exciting. But you can be deliberate with it, and I think that you said it there when you said you give people the room, or play the jazz, or even in a coaching situation, instead of me as the coach or the VP or the CEO being directive. Here's what you need to do. I listen to this. Do this. Don't do that. You can instantly turn yourself into a coach or a servant leader by giving somebody the directive being, bring to me what you want to work on. You know, something as simple as that. Bring me a conversation or a situation or something that you want to work on. We'll work on that together. And those little tiny things change the whole entire, dynamic of relationships with people, the culture of an organization, the spirit of a deal, somebody wanting to actually follow up with you or know you or get back to you, and things like this. So with all of that said, let's talk about your journey to Splice Video, and we'll get right into the storytelling for the last 15 minutes here that we have. I went to your website, and I have this little thing that I do. I know that I'm a contrarian sometimes. There's part of my personality type that simply goes against the grain for the sake of going against the grain. It's who I am. I've dealt
Because
with
you're
it.
playing jazz.
You're right. You know, and I've come to deal with that. Sometimes I have to mitigate that by biting my tongue or saying something completely different. But one of the things that I often do when people, when it comes to personalizing or reviewing somebody's website or something, I picked this up from Chris Beal at Connect and Sell. He does intro calls and discovery calls, and he always says, I took a few minutes and I went over to your website, and I think I have a pretty good idea of what you do, but turns out I'm usually wrong, or somebody says, don't pay attention to the website. The website's going through a revamp. That's not our current message. And it's funny because when I told you, I looked at your website, you said, hey, man, I got some great stories to tell you that aren't on the website, right? It never fails, right? It never fails, as much as we try to focus on personalization. You end up getting it wrong. But one thing I noticed when I scrolled down to the bottom of your website is you told a little story about building your brand, and what kind of supercharged that was you ran into another podcast where Dave Gearhart was saying, just get a brand up, just get it going. And then you talked a little bit more about what a brand is and what it isn't and how to get it started. Could you just kind of share that story just real quick in 30 seconds or a minute, and then we can talk about all the different storytelling themes and things that you're working on over there at Splice.
No, 100%. So I think, the best way to think about this is when I was on a cruise ship, the minute you walked up the gangplank, for the next 7 days, you were experiencing that cruise line's brand. You could not get away from it. So for 160 hours, you were living and breathing the brand. And that's what I realized, again, when I got into B2B tech and I started working in marketing teams, and they're like, this color, this logo, well, this font has to be exactly here. And I'm like, that's not brand. What brand is the experience that people have with you and your company, from the initial, however they first come into the top of funnel, to customer success. Every step of the way, every interaction they have with you is that feeling, right? That's what brand is. Truly, I really believe that. And I'm sure there's people who will come up and argue with me. But to me, I just spent 10 years living on ships. 36 different cruise ships, 8 different cruise lines. I worked with everybody. It was the nature of the job I had. Wasn't a job jumper, but it was just, we were contractors. And, it was, what was so fascinating was one cruise line, I won't go through the cruise lines, but one of them real quick was like, we know exactly who our target demographic is. Our ICP, they would call them Nebraska Warren Buffett. They wanted Midwesterners who were of a certain age, who were of a certain had certain finances. That's all they wanted. Whereas Royal Caribbean was more family, and we're gonna have the biggest, best ships, but it's be really great for the kids, right?
Yeah.
And then Disney was that times 10 because of the price point. So yeah, long answer to brand is the way people feel about you. When I say Humantic, what do I think? That's what brand is. That feeling.
I think we were talking. I was sharing with you when I heard you say that in your video. It immediately made me think of that it was synonymous with culture, because I think a lot of times in culture, people will say, oh, like recently people say, hey, we're a diversity and inclusive kind of organization. Well, you can say whatever you want to say you are. It seems to me that culture and brand are the living, breathing fabric of what you are. It's not what you want to be or what you're aiming at. It's what's actually happening at the moment.
100%.
Yeah. So, uh, tell me a little bit more. One of the things about the way that you tell stories, I don't know, you mentioned that, hey, you could read the room. There's probably, the humantic side of this thing is being able to identify personality types and then modify your behavior. But some of the things that I've heard you do when you tell stories, and these are, again, frameworks or guardrails or so on to making to a good story, or what people say is a good story, like giving things context. And I've heard you do it. I was wondering what your thoughts are, and then you can share what's really working for developing really good reels or really good videos for your clients and things like that. But setting context and framework, like being able to create a landscape for a story. And one of the things that I've always read when I've done research, like how to tell a good story or storytelling in B2B, some of the advice that people give is to draw a picture, illustrate it, give it a location, give it a time, give it some essence, and then go into your story to kind of draw people in. What are your thoughts on those frameworks? How well they work? Do they work on different people? Do you need to be aware of who you're telling the story to so that you write the story correctly? Things like this.
So what you're talking about is sensory storytelling. And to me, that is the most critical key thing. It works on every persona, but you have to get really deep into it. So let me tell you what I mean. So we talk about frameworks. Most times when we talk about storytelling, if I walk into a room, so I was working with a lot of sales engineers, they had to really tell great stories doing product demos. And they were stuck on the hero's journey. When the hero's journey is great, you have a person, you have a problem, you have a helping hand, and then you have a victory.
Yeah.
But that was the extent of kind of what they were taught. And what I would challenge them to do is really get into the sensory details. Think about it this way. When you read a book, when you read a great novel, like if I pull out a John Grisham book, I'm sucked in. I don't read a lot, but I will get sucked into like a John Grisham novel. Why? The vivid imagery that he creates. So let's talk about what that looks like. So I was in a room with sales engineers and I challenged someone. I said, okay, I want you to tell me who took a walk around their neighborhood last night. One guy put his hand up. I said, okay, what did you see? Well, I walked out of my house. I saw a car that wasn't normally there. I saw a tree and I saw a dog. Okay, cool. First of all, what's the first thing you experienced when you walked outside? What? No. What did you feel? Was it warmer than normal? Was it actually, it was a bit of a cool evening. It was a bit crisp. What did that feel like against your skin? I'm not saying to put this into a sales call, but think about it. Think about how granular, right? How would someone write the novel of this? So I walked out of the house and I felt this cool breeze, press against my jacket, and I could feel the coolness. What did that tree look like? Was it a white aspen tree? Was it a grayish oak tree? And then what does the bark look like? What is it? Describe that peeling away, the way the aspen tree's bark peels away. And what color were the leaves? What shade of green were the leaves? Were they a mossy green? Were they a emerald green? Were they a mint green? And then what did the leaf feel like? Was it waxy like you're in Florida, or was it starting to dry out because it was the end of summer in Colorado, right? Those little things, thinking how to describe those things is critical, because what you're trying to do with a great story, Shawn, is you're trying to get the person on the other end of that's sitting in the audience. You're trying to pull them across and make them feel that they're sitting next to you in this story. And when you create vivid images, people can literally feel themselves in that same story with you. They can't help it. They get pulled in. And at the end of the day, what that's going to doesn't mean they're going to buy. But what it means is they're engaged and they're going to pay better attention. And the reason that I think this is so important is at the end of the day, we're all selling widgets. And if there's 10 widget sellers, we're just one of 10. But if you can tell a really great story and make someone feel those pain points, you now are more likely to build a champion. And if you have a strong champion, well, maybe automatically you're into the top 3, because I got news for you. Most of those widgets do kind of the same thing. So it's a way to really separate yourself and get yourself, closer to where you want to be. The added advantage of telling visual stories is that this champion now will better tell the story the way you want it told, using the imagery that you've crafted internally to other stakeholders. So that's a really important, not to me dismissed point, because it helps you farther down the funnel, whether you're multi-threading the deal or whether they're out there on their own. You have this same story, you have this cohesion of what the pain points are.
Yeah, that exercise of trying to get to the bottom of something, and when I say the bottom, I mean where there's nothing else underneath. My experience, that has turned out to be there is no bottom. You can keep going and going. But my question for you is, how exhaustive is that in your process? Because that sounds like a discovery process for you when you're creating videos and content, that there's probably a process there. Um, how much work does it take to kind of get to know someone well enough to help them unpack their story and actually create something for them that helps them tell their corporate story or their value story or their brand story or whatever it is the end goal is, in working backwards, of course. um, how exhaustive is that discovery process for you, in your business?
You know what? I can spin it up in 3 minutes, but if you give me an hour, that's going to be the best way to kind of pull out the conversation. But if I'm thinking tactically from a sales point of view, the key thing, the most important thing is getting someone's camera on the other side. So whatever tactic you have to use to get them to turn the camera on, because now you're seeing a different form of them. How are they sitting? Are they leaning in? Are they paying attention to you? Are they standoffish? Are they on another screen? Right? All those things. Because again, it goes back to me on stage reading body language. What are the key words? What's the key case study? I'm selling to accountants. What got that financial controller to turn around and say, oh, that's interesting, right? And as soon as I see that, I'm time stamping that 1321 so I can come back and see exactly what I said. Because so much of it is building around personas, right? And I think one of the keys that people miss, and I just think this because I have this conversation and I get an aha moment from people, use case studies, right? What are the case studies? If Shawn has this type of role, what is a similar person who's had this problem? And I can, doing discovery, I can pull out, seeing if they have a similar problem. Maybe it's not the initial problem I thought. Maybe Shawn, after some discovery, actually it's closer to this other persona's problem. But then saying, interesting story, Shawn. I was talking to ABC, who's now a client of ours. They actually had a very similar situation, similar type role. Again, what am I doing? I'm not using vivid imagery, but what I'm doing is I'm getting someone pulled across into my side of the story, because now they're feeling the pain point that same CRO felt, right?
Yeah.
It's critical. So important.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. This is one of the things in my onboardings and trainings and coaching, and I say that in that order. Training people to use the Humantic software and then coaching them to high performance, because training is how to use the software. The second part is how to, take the insights, personality type insights that you gain, and be able to, communicate with those people in their natural style. But even for prospecting and selling, um, we've taken it so far to say, well, hey, if you know that you're dealing with this kind of personality type, they're going to respond better to this kind of interaction. I'm going to give you a simple example, then we'll wrap it up and we'll let everyone know how to get a hold of you and connect with you. Uh, you know, the DISC spectrum is, dominant, influencer, steady, and calculative, right? So if you're dealing with influencers, and I'm going to take this all the way back to what I do to, you know, prospecting and so on, is if I've got a list of people and there's influencers on them, what I'm going to do as a beginner, I'm just going to change the kind of way that I tone and pace what I'm saying to kind of be so it's more receptive, more inviting for them. But as I get more advanced, I may actually change my whole entire strategy to, you know what, I'm going to invite influencers to roundtables because they like to get together and talk and gab away, which is a whole nother level, you know, which again is, I think, is exactly what you're doing and what you've demonstrated in your storytelling. And I know that all of the technical pieces of putting a video together and all that stuff, you know, that's probably, I don't want to say the easy part, but the boring part is drawing people out and getting the message and then putting everything together. So if somebody wants to visit you, get to know you, have a discovery call with you, see if you can build them a great story, and do some videos for them, where are they going to find you, Nick?
Best bet is going to be on LinkedIn. Best way to connect with me, you can visit our website, splicevideo.com. It is a dumpster fire right now. We kind of spun up this business very quickly, but we help brands tell their story. We do a lot of executive interviews, a lot of case studies. Basically, visual storytelling is what we do. But just before we wrap, I want to give some really great tactical pieces, Shawn, if I may.
Yeah, let's do it.
Here's a great thing. Who are you selling to? Let's say it's accountants. What do accountants care about? Set those up as Google News alerts. So when something is relevant, you can be like, hey, accountant, I read this article, thought it might be relevant for you. Two things, showing you're thinking about them. Also, you're not saying, I'm just following up. It's a great way to continue conversations without being in someone's face, depending on where they are in the funnel. Second thing is use video in your sales process. If I was not creating video for other people and I was still in sales, I would be using a video in every aspect of my funnel, from prospecting to, proposal recaps. I once did a proposal recap, 45-second video, 40 unique users within an organization watch that. So that is the power of using video. So a couple quick tips for you there, Shawn.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And for anyone who's wondering what Nick and I's personality types are, they are similar. We're both kind of steady, dominant influencers, kind of a balance of everything. And that's probably one of the reasons why we can carry on for hours and hours and hours and hours. And on a personal note, I'm looking forward to that drive over to Sedona, and we'll talk again soon, Nick. Thank you very much for sharing some of your time with us.
Such a pleasure.
Thank you.